And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather showing out here to the west, next system coming across the Bering Sea, spreading some rain into the east central Aleutians here. Some gusty west winds, showers following in behind. Fair skies over all the interior here and dry conditions with light winds. Then we have the big storm here that's now in a weakening condition here as it starts to track eastward. So we've got hurricane force wind warnings out in the Gulf of Alaska in the offshore areas, and then storm and gale warnings out here along the southeast coast, and expect rain, increasing rain here with that system, and then high wind warnings out for the central and south coast eastward there across Metlakatla and Net. High wind warnings out tonight until 10 a.m. tomorrow, as we see, and then conditions will begin to die down a little bit in the afternoon, but as you can see, quite a gradient still for tomorrow afternoon as this low tracks eastward, slowly weakening, but enough of a pressure gradient there to keep it very windy across all the southeast coast and the southern central areas through tomorrow afternoon, with heaviest rainfall amounts here over the southern panhandle and the absolute heaviest down across the Queen Charlottes into British Columbia. Otherwise, light winds, a lot of sunshine over the interior tomorrow from Kodiak Island, Kenai Peninsula, right up into the interior. Variably cloudy, Arctic coast and north slope, and even fair conditions out here over the northern Bering Sea, Chukchi across the Seward Peninsula, and some sunshine even along the southwest coast as this system brings some rain into the Alaska Peninsula and showers to the Pribilofs. Another system dropping southeastward out of the Russian Far East there will continue to rotate down to the southeast here, and then we've got a frontal boundary covering, extending across all the Bering Sea there, right on down to the Alaska Peninsula. So periods of rain here for the peninsula, Pribilof Islands, on up to St. Lawrence Island. Another break behind that, and then another warm front pushing some warm front type weather into the western Aleutians there. Sunshine, mostly sunny over all of the interior. A few more clouds on the Arctic coast there. But look for increasing clouds here throughout the day for Prince William Sound, Kenai Peninsula, and even into possibly northern Cook Inlet in the afternoon, with increasing chances of showers along all the North Gulf Coast, and with that trough down across the Panhandle. And this system, again, bringing just a threat of some light rain to Kodiak Island. Otherwise, backing it up one here, this system moves eastward and weakens rapidly right about there for Wednesday afternoon. And for the coastal water forecast for tomorrow, east to south winds, gale force east to south winds here for the central and south coast at 35 knots with higher gusts, Prince of Wales Island, storm force gusts there. Otherwise, gale warnings for Clarence Strait, southeast winds 40 knots for Tuesday, seas 18 feet. Southeast winds 25 to 35 knots for Stevens Passage, and north winds 20 gusting 35 knots for Lynn Canal. The extreme north coast here, winds north to northwest at about 20 knots. And then for the day on Wednesday, we've got east winds here on the north coast at 15 to 20 knots. Otherwise, the central and south coast, west winds 20 to 30 knots. And for Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, Stevens Passage, lighter winds for the day with winds out of the north at about 10 knots, seas subsiding to 2 feet. Clarence Strait, northwest winds at 20 knots, seas subsiding to 12 feet. And for Prince William Sound, Tuesday, light variable winds at 10 knots. And for the North Gulf Coast, variable winds 10 to 15 knots. Barren Islands, northwest at 30 knots, 13-foot seas. Kamishak Bay, west at 30 knots. And Cook Inlet, variable winds 10 to 15 knots. For the day on Wednesday, Cook Inlet, variable to northeast winds at 10 knots with slight seas. Northwest at 15 for Kamishak Bay. Barren Islands, southwest winds 20 knots. And variable winds at 10 knots to the western North Gulf Coast. And then south to southeast winds with that weak trough coming up here, making the winds south to southeast at 15 knots, with seas at about 7 feet, and east winds 15 knots for Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island tomorrow, winds right out of the west at 25 to 30 knots there, with seas up to 14 feet. Bristol Bay, west winds at about 20 knots there. And for the Alaska Peninsula, south to southwest winds 15 to 25 knots, seas as high as 8 feet. And then for the day on Wednesday, here for the peninsula, variable winds at 10 to maybe 15 knots. Light northeast breeze for Bristol Bay at 10 knots. Kodiak Island, variable to southeast winds 10 to 15 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, we've got west-southwesterlies at 20 to 30 knots there. Adak and Atka, west at 20 knots with 6 to 9 foot seas. And out west here, 25 to 35 knot winds, mostly from the southwest. And for the day on Wednesday, for Adak and Atka, west winds 25 knots. Otherwise, the western Aleutians looking at west to southwest winds at 20 to 30 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians, west-southwest winds at 20 to 25 knots with seas at about 6 to 8 feet. And for the southwest coast, St. Lawrence Island, Norton Sound, winds all light and variable at 5 to 10 knots. Pribilof Island, small craft advisories there, south winds at 25 knots with seas up to 8 feet, and east winds at 20 knots for St. Matthew Island with 9-foot seas. And then for the day on Wednesday, south winds 20 knots here for St. Matthew Island, the Pribilof, southwest at 15, and the southwest coast here, looking at a southeast wind at about 15 knots, and St. Lawrence Island, light southeast wind at 10. And for the Chukchi Sea tomorrow, north to northeast winds at 10 knots, east winds 15 knots for the central and western Arctic coast, and the east side, winds will be out of the east at 20 knots, 4 to 5 foot seas. And then for the day on Wednesday, for the eastern Arctic coast, west-southwest winds now there at about 10 to 20 knots. Light east winds at 10 knots for the central western Arctic coast, and even lighter winds for the Chukchi Sea, mostly from the southeast at just 5 to 10 knots.